Hello again and welcome to Prohibition University. Well, it looks like the apples are ready on my tree for harvesting. What I'm going to make this year is apple liquor. And the video that you're about to see outlines the basic process for harvesting the apples, processing them, fermenting them into an apple wine, and then distilling that apple wine to make the apple liquor. In terms of basic equipment, you're going to need, of course, a plastic fermenter pail for fermenting the apples. I also recommend a propane-fired heater and some sort of a cooking pot or stock pot or mash pot for cooking the apples, and some method of stirring them while you gently heat the apple mash. Additional equipment and supplies you may need. You will need a food processor of some sort to grind up and crush the apples. You will need a digital weigh scale to weigh out and accurately measure the quantity of apple we're adding to the recipe. You will need some cleaning solution, whether it's IOSTAR or an acidic-based solution for cleaning your fermentation bucket and any equipment that will come in contact with the apple mash. You will need a thermometer. You will need a pH meter to accurately measure the pH of your mash. If you have to adjust the pH of your mash, acid blend or citric acid will do the job. To determine the sugar content of the apple mash, a simple refractometer will be required. And to adjust the sugar content of the apple mash, either table sugar or corn sugar will be required. All of these instruments, all of these supplies are readily available either at your local department store or at your local store that sells supplies to the home brewer or the home winemaker. Okay, so after picking the apples off the tree, I washed them very carefully and at the same time removed all of the stems and the leaves. Using a simple kitchen knife, I have then cut the apples into quarter sections. I'm not too worried about removing the seeds. I'm leaving all of that in. Using the digital scale, I'm weighing out the apples and recording the amount. What I'm looking for is 1/2 kilogram of apples per liter of volume of my fermentation pail. I'm planning on doing a 20-liter fermentation, so therefore I'm looking to get a total of 10 kilograms of apple. I'm going to take the quarter-sectioned apples into the food processor and I'm going to grind them up. Okay, so using the refractometer, what I did is I took some of my chopped up apple mixture from the blender, and using a simple straining device I managed to strain a bit of liquid onto the lens of the refractometer. What I'm getting is a reading of 7 bricks, which tells me that there's about 7% fermentable sugars in that apple mixture. So therefore we will be adding ample amounts of corn sugar. I do want to get my bricks level up to around about 18 if I can do it. Now the other thing that I have done is using the pH meter, I've immersed it in a cup full of the mashed up liquid from the blender, and you can see that I'm getting a pH reading of just over 3. So therefore I need to be somewhat cautious. I was going to use some of my standard vodka yeast that I use for my grain distillation. However, with the low pH, I'm going to have to get a different strain of yeast that is more suited to the lower pH values and that is better suited to use for using with fruit. So we've chopped up our apples in the food processor. What I've done is I've added that chopped up apple mixture to my mash kettle. I have added 15 liters of water. So essentially what we've got is 15 liters of water, 10 kilograms of apple solids, and some of the apple juice that was liberated as we ground it up in the food processor. I now want to add, and this is optional on your part, I'm going to be adding an enzyme, a very tiny amount, like 1/4 teaspoon. It's called lafazyme. It is designed for helping to extract more of the aromatics from the fruit that you are processing. I'm going to be heating my apple mash up to 40 degrees centigrade, and there is a reason for that as well. Fruit contains a carbohydrate called pectin. When yeast interacts with pectin during the fermentation, it produces methyl pectate. During the subsequent distillation, methyl pectate will translate into an increased amount of what we call heads, or the undesirable alcohols that appear at the first part of the distillation run. By heating the apple mash, or whatever fruit you happen to be working with, you are denaturing the pectin carbohydrate. You are inhibiting the ability of the yeast to generate those nasty methyl pectates. You will therefore get more of the good alcohols coming off of your distillation and fewer of the nasty heads or the methanols. So 40 degrees C, once it's there, I'm going to hold it for approximately half an hour, and at that point I will be moving the mash from the mash kettle into the fermentation bucket and adding the yeast. Now along the way I'm going to be adding corn sugar, because recall that I said the Brix reading of the apple mixture was about 7, so I obviously have to add sugar to get that up. I will be adding sugar incrementally, and as I'm heating the mash it will dissolve in solution. I will be using the refractometer to take various tests along the way. What I'm aiming to do is add enough sugar so that I get my Brix reading up to around about 18 or 19. Apples have all been processed in the food processor. They've been put into the mash kettle, heated to 40 degrees centigrade, sugar added, number of bricks of sugar has been adjusted, mash of apples has been allowed to cool down to 30 degrees centigrade, transferred into the sterilized fermenter bucket, and it's time now for the yeast. Now recall earlier in this video I showed you how the pH was a little bit low. I'm a little reluctant to start using my standard distiller's yeast because I don't think it's tolerant at pH of about 3 or 3.5. I went to my local winemaking shop just now and I came back with what they're calling premium wine yeast. Looks like it's from New Zealand, and it is ideally suited for fruit wines, sparkling wines. This will have the tolerance to withstand the lower pH, and it is also alcohol tolerant so that I can get a fairly decent alcohol concentration in the primary ferment. So I'll be adding 1 pack, which is 8 grams, to each of my fermenter pails, and we will let that ferment then for approximately 8 or 9 days, and at that point we'll be distilling the products of the fermentation and making apple brandy, apple moonshine, apple liquor, call it what you may. Okay, so the fermentation on our apple mash is now complete, and what I'm going to do to ensure that I have no lumps or solids in the liquid that I'm going to be putting into the HillBilly Still, I'm simply going to ladle the fermented liquid through a fine meshed sieve, or colander I guess you would call it, and I obtained one of these at a restaurant supply store. This is a sieve that a chef in a restaurant would use if he was making a consommé or some sort of a clear broth to get all of his solids out, and it tends to work very, very well for things like fruit mashes. Okay, so using a simple funnel, we're going to start filling the HillBilly Still. Okay, so the HillBilly Still has been heating for over an hour, and you can see the temperature is just above 80, which means the alcoholic vapors have now pretty much risen out of the pot, and they have worked their way up the 6 plates of the column. And I've got water on to the top section of the column. I'm holding it fairly cool. My objective is to hold this column in reflux, because I am trying to make an apple vodka out of this. I want to strip away as much of the residual flavor as I can, and I'm going to hold it in reflux for probably a good half hour, maybe 45 minutes, and then I'll gradually allow the vapors to progress up through the top of the still and over into the condenser, down through the parrot and into my collection vessel. Okay, so now you can see the first part of the distillation run. The heads are starting to dribble off, and I've now held that column in reflux for 35 minutes, and I've got my cooling water set just to give me a slow trickle here. And I'm going to collect these heads, discard them, and then I'll be putting a different container under here to start collecting the hearts momentarily. And all I'm doing for these heads is I'm just dipping my finger in there, rubbing it on the side of my tongue, and as soon as I feel the tingling sensation no longer really there, I know that I'm into the good alcohols. And I'm going to be switching to hearts here in about the next 10 seconds, so here we go. Okay, so we're now well into our hearts collection, and you can see I've dialed back the heat on the electric heating element, so the temperature is holding fairly uniform, just under 90. Temperature up here, this is not the most accurate thermometer in the world, but it's showing about 77, give or take a degree or two. So it's holding very, very nicely. Alcohol meter is telling me I've got alcohol at about 90% coming off the parrot. And you can see that I'm just collecting it at a nice gentle drip. And basically from here I sit back and read the newspaper and maybe have a beer and just let the whole process unwind. Okay, so here we are, finished. Recall that we started with 35 liters of apple wine, essentially, in the HillBilly Still. Held it in reflux for 35-40 minutes, and I got over 2 liters of alcohol coming off of there at between 88 and 91% on the alcohol meter on the Parrot. All that I'm doing now is passing it through this Brita filter, and you can see it dripping out of the filter cartridge there. I'm going to pass the vodka through there twice, maybe 3 times, just to remove any trace amounts of any fusel oils or off odors. And from there, I'll probably use this as my base alcohol to make a run of gin, or possibly I will use it to make a batch of limoncello. But I do want to point out one thing just in closing here. Believe me, these HillBilly Stills are hobby stills, no question about it. You're not going to start a craft distillery with one. You're not going to make vodka at 89 or 90% and try to serve that to the general public. It's okay for home consumption, but when it comes to making a product for the public, you have got to have proper equipment, larger stills, and make a superior product. So go ahead and get yourself a HillBilly Still for home, but please do not try to incorporate it into some kind of a craft distillery or your business plan. It just will not work. And that is about it. So you can see that apples are a wonderful fruit to work with. They make a very credible vodka, and you can have lots of fun with your apples at home and your HillBilly Still, and you can make all kinds of wonderful things. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video that I produce. Take care.